All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's information session on the Stoneleigh Emerging Leader Fellowship Program. My name is Mark Halk. I'm a program officer here at the Stoneleigh Foundation. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Lee Carson, who is also a program officer here at Stoneleigh and who leads the Emerging Leader Program. Our goals for the information session for today are to tell you more about the work of the Stoneleigh Foundation if you've never heard of us before, to help you better understand the Emerging Leader Fellowship Program, to determine whether it's a good fit for your organization, and if so, how to apply. And finally, to tell you why we've chosen to dedicate this next cohort of fellows to focus on the issue of gun violence. During the presentation, we encourage you to ask questions using our Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom windows. Lee or I will try to address your question in real time if we can fit it in. Otherwise, we will have a dedicated time at the end of today's session for Q&A, so we'll get to it then. When you submit your question, please make sure that you include your name and organization so that we can just, better tailor our answer to the organization that you're coming from. So our plan for this afternoon, again, is to tell you a little bit more about Stoneleigh, the Emerging Leader Program, and we'll also highlight there the basics for the fellowship. Then we'll also talk about why we've decided to focus this cohort on gun violence. And finally, we'll review the logistics of the application process, the upcoming deadlines. And again, we'll have time for Q&A at the end to talk about any questions you might have about that application process or what to expect. So to start with, a little bit about Stoneleigh. For those of you who are not familiar with us already, we're founded about 15, 16 years ago by John and Cara Haas, who are a private family foundation, with a mission to improve the life outcomes of Philadelphia's young people, children and families specifically. Founders really believe, we're a little bit unique as a foundation. We really believe in the power of individuals to affect lasting social change, especially when given dedicated time to and the space to step back from day-to-day job responsibilities. So as a result, Stoneleigh, we don't fund so much these organizational-based grants, right? We fund these project and individual-focused fellowships. We have two primary fellowship programs, the Stoneleigh Fellowship and the Emerging Leader Fellowship, both funding individuals and projects, individuals who are working within and alongside youth-serving systems to catalyze change. Our Stoneleigh Fellows are more experienced, typically more experienced policymakers, practitioners, researchers, and other professionals who design and execute multi-year projects, typically 3 to 5 year projects, largely independently. They're often working quite independently from supervision at their host organization and us. Emerging Leader Fellowships, in contrast, are typically focused around early career professionals, and that can be both somebody who's starting their general career for the first time or somebody making a career change, but typically somebody who's early on in that phase of their career. And somebody who can also do similar work to the Stoneleigh Fellows, but they benefit from some more direct supervision, both from us and from their host organizations. We'll get into more detail about that shortly. Both types of fellowships undertake projects that enhance how systems work together, typically improve policy and practice, and or generate new knowledge through action-oriented research. So what are Stoneleigh's priorities? Historically, the bulk of our fellows have worked to address issues facing youth who are involved in either the juvenile justice, as some might say, or the youth justice and child welfare systems. But we're also very interested in cross-systems or cross-issues work. And over the years, we've invested in a wide variety of projects that impact children and families. And that can be anything from school discipline, truancy, physical or behavioral health, housing, really any other issues that are critical to young people and their ability to successfully transition into adulthood. This year, as we've previously mentioned, we are seeking project proposals that specifically seek to address the epidemic of gun violence in Philadelphia. And that can be from a policy, practice, research, advocacy, organizing, or communications lens. That's something that, again, my colleague Lee Carson will be talking about in more detail shortly. Just a little bit more. So we've also supported a wide variety of fellows since Stoneleigh's founding, including more than 40 emerging leaders. And that's, again, with projects that kind of run the gamut all across issues and, strategies as well. Our fellows come from many different educational and professional backgrounds, including law, social work, medicine, public administration, education, and organizing. We've had emerging leader fellows who don't have a college degree, some that have PhDs, masters, bachelors, and otherwise. During their fellowships, we work closely with each emerging leader to strengthen their connections with one another. We feel this is very important, and our network, right, our fellowship network. We provide them with ongoing opportunities for learning and professional development to diversify their knowledge and networks, right? So we'd be working with them throughout the fellowship to give them some of those opportunities. So to get into the specific details of the Emerging Leader Fellowship a little, before I turn it over to Lee here. If you're not familiar with the fellowship already, what is the fellowship? It's a 2-year, right? So critical, it's 2-year hands-on learning and leadership development opportunity for early career professionals in Philadelphia. So something we always try to emphasize is that, yes, the project that's being proposed in the application is important to us, but the opportunity for professional development and growth and leadership potential is that is also there in the application, right? That the Emerging Leader Fellow is getting that kind of experience out of it as well. So why should organizations apply? Well, fellows are working collaboratively with the host organization to lead a project that also advances the host organization's mission of the organization while enhancing the fellows' skills and professional development, right? So ideally, this project should be something that aligns with the work that your organization is already doing and enhances it in some way. So for host organizations in this cohort specifically, but it's an opportunity to also address the gun violence epidemic if that's something that your organization is focused on. This is an issue that's really gripped our city for the last several years, if not decades. This year alone, it's already claimed the lives of more than 100 Philadelphians, and just something that Stoneleigh in particular, we hope you all as well are really dedicated to focusing on. This is also an opportunity to enable your organization to advance its work, again, by bringing on top new talent, right? The fellowship, we believe, makes it possible to bring in somebody from the outside, somebody who's highly qualified, and it's just one more person who can execute a project that's critical to your organization's mission, right? Really jumpstart the work that you're doing by launching something new or expanding on something that you're already doing. And finally, right, this is an opportunity to build the next generation of leaders in the field. So you'll have the chance to help an early career professional experience these leadership development opportunities, to make critical connections, to try something new. Hopefully it'll be something that sets them up for success for the rest of their career. They'll stick around in Philadelphia, continue to contribute to the issues and the work that we care about. So to give you some very quick examples, again, before I turn it over to Lee, this is our current cohort of Emerging Leader Fellows. If you have some time, you're thinking about applying for the Emerging Leader Fellowship, absolutely take a moment to go onto our website to read the bios and backgrounds of these individuals, to take a look. It's about 300, 400 words on the projects that they're working on, to give you some of the ideas that we're currently funding. For the sake of time, I'll give you an example of one or two of these folks, and then we'll move on. So the first one is Hannah Victoria Mason, who's partnering with the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project to extend the scope of their Healing Futures Restorative Justice Diversion Program that's working with Philadelphia's youth justice system. So this program recognizes the fact that the traditional response to gun violence is often to incarcerate the young person, to separate them from their, but if it's a young person who's committing the harm, to separate them from their support systems, to detain them in facilities that are unfortunately typically well-documented sites of abuse and neglect. Doesn't really do a whole lot to put them back on the pathway to success, doesn't help the victim so much. And so this is giving them a space, opportunity, and kind of guided rails to both help the person who was harmed and the person who committed the harm. Second example here, second and final example. So Ronnie McLean is partnering with the Philadelphia Center for Gun Violence Reporting to identify, recruit, and support survivors of firearm violence, ultimately with the goal of connecting them to journalists so that they can talk about their experiences of violence in their communities, right? So we often see on the news these episodic reports of firearm violence where you're just getting the very basic details of what happened, but there's very little context provided or very little education on the public health perspective of this issue. And so, Rhonda working with people who've been harmed by gun violence to help them share their perspective with the media and give the media a little training to better, speak with individuals who've been traumatized by such an event. So just a little bit about the program. Now I'm going to turn it over again to my wonderful colleague, Lee Carson. Lee is the person leading this program, best person to speak on it at length and to answer questions about it. So Lee, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for all of you who are here today joining us. So Really, this is for academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, public sector agencies that are in Philadelphia. So all of those types of organizations are eligible for this grant opportunity. Fellowships last, as Mark already mentioned, 2 years, and they begin in September 2025. And this is an opportunity for early career professionals who would really like to hone and develop their skill set in a certain on a certain subject area. This really gives them an opportunity to do that. And in this instance, as Mark has already mentioned as well, that we're focusing this cycle again, this 2 year cycle on gun violence prevention related projects. So if there's someone who really is interested and invested in mitigating the impact of gun violence in Philadelphia, and they feel they seem like a good fit for your project, then that's someone who may be a good fit for an emerging leader fellowship. And then award covers salary and benefits and payroll taxes. So again, just reiterating what Mark said earlier, is that this really is focused on the fellow. And so that's essentially what we fund, is for the fellow's salary and benefits. So things that Stoneleigh provides, the supports we provide throughout the fellowship period, is a dedicated program officer, which is me. And so I'll be working with each of the emerging leader fellows individually and collectively throughout the course of that 2 year period. We also provide robust programming, and I'll talk a little bit more about examples of our programming on the next slide. And we also provide up to $2,500 a year for professional development activities. So this could be towards their tuition if they're currently in school. It could be towards any kind of certificate program, anything that's advancing their educational abilities as it relates to the project in some way is eligible for our PD funds, and conferences and things like that as well. And then also we provide up to $500 of that PD funds for wellness related activities. So this could be for copays, reimbursement for copays of therapy appointments, or for gym memberships, et cetera. So we realize that working on gun violence can be a very stressful and potentially traumatizing um, uh, vicarious trauma kind of a situation. So we want to make sure that we provide some emotional support for folks if they feel that they need it. So some examples of programming that we've provided for this current cycle of fellows, they include representatives from the Mayor's Office of Violence Prevention, which now is called Office of Safe Neighborhoods under the Parker administration. So they came to talk about the various initiatives that they have, including funding opportunities and strategies that they employ to address gun violence in Philadelphia. We also had representatives from the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency at the state level to talk about their work and the initiatives that they have around the state and pulling people together to sort of address gun violence in their respective cities. We had representatives from the Philadelphia Department of Injury Prevention, from the Injury Prevention Division, who talked also about how they collect data about some of the community. They have a coalition of community violence intervention organizations. And so they talked about the work of those organizations and how they're addressing gun violence in the city and the different public health strategies that they're employing to do that. We also have hired someone to work with our fellows on career pathway development. So in fact, we had this person met with the fellows last week, and we intentionally did this a year when they have a year left on their fellowship. So that way fellows have a sense of what are their next steps. They have a year, they have plenty of time to plan what they might want to do post fellowship. So that's something else we've provided. And we also give them access, Mark mentioned earlier about a directory of fellows. We have a pretty extensive fellow network, and this includes a number of emerging leader fellows who are now alumni. And so we connect current fellows with alumni fellows so that the alumni can share what their experience was, the lessons that they learned, and what they wish they would have done differently during their fellowship. So that way, current fellows can learn from that and maybe adjust sort of how they operate inside of their fellowship based on the knowledge and insight of previous fellows. And so the expectations that we have of the host organization include identifying a supervisor who can meet regularly with the fellow. And so this is something that we're looking at very closely because we really want, because what we learned in the past is that sometimes once emerging leader fellows get inside the organization, the first couple of months, they have a lot of support. And then after that, they begin to encounter challenges of having enough support, enough time from the host site supervisor and other staff who are helping implement the project. And so we have an investment in projects being successful, but we also have a huge investment in the fellow having a positive experience inside of the host organization and having the support that they need to implement the project. So we will be looking closely at how organizations, how applicants are describing the support that they'll provide for fellows. Their responsibility is also to help fellow problem solve challenges. So as things come up, they encounter challenges either inside the organization or with the project, with outside partners, whatever it might be, to really help problem solve with them. And I will also work with you. That's part of my role as a program officer, is to be a thought partner along with the fellow as well as the host site supervisor to work through any challenges and to make their projects as successful as possible. And also the host site supervisor should ensure the impact and sustainability of the project. And one of the things that I do in my approach to as a program officer is after the first year is complete, I want to have a conversation with the host site supervisor as well as the fellows to really think about, well, what are you thinking about for sustainability? Does the fellow want to stay on in this organization and this project? Does the host site organization want to keep the project as they propose? What resources might you need be after the fellowship period? So we begin to have those conversations after the first year. Uh, yep, thanks. All right, and so for the solicitation itself, so I'm not going to read through all of this because hopefully everyone has had a chance who's on this call to review this in advance, but if you have not, then please take some time to read through the solicitation. But essentially, we are looking for projects that are focused on addressing the gun violence epidemic in Philadelphia, and we're looking for them to do that through the lens of either youth justice, health, which includes behavioral health, education, and/or child welfare systems. We also are really looking at projects that may have a social ecological, that might be addressing the social ecological underpinnings of gun violence. So we realize that communities exist in an ecosystem, individuals exist in an ecosystem, and so we're really taking a look at that as well. So projects that focus on that aspect are also welcome. So types of project features, and so these are not that we require that your applications address these, but we think that these are interests that we have, and they will help to make your application stronger if you address at least one or two of these sort of aspects into your project. So one of them is that we're interested in projects that emphasize a public health and/or policy change approach to gun violence, or maybe you're looking at research like evaluating or promising practice. So we realize that some organizations may have developed some kind of intervention or some kind of a project that they've not been able to evaluate to understand its effectiveness. And so maybe you're looking to understand whether or not this is a promising practice that does, that is an evidence-based practice or something like that. So we're looking for projects that, particularly with the public health approach, and people may have seen, and if you've not, I would suggest that you look at the video and also the document from the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, who released at the end of June, I believe it was, about announcing gun violence as a public health crisis. And so, public health, that approach is really important. Projects that explore neighborhood-based and social ecological variations of gun violence. So we know that in Philadelphia, it's often described as a city of neighborhoods. And so even within sections of the city, for example, with different neighborhoods within West Philadelphia or Southwest. So we realize that there may be different variations. And so understanding or attempting to understand or intervene on those more nuanced aspects of gun violence in a neighborhood are something that we're looking at as well, we're interested in as well. So community level gun prevention projects. that really look to create a shift in social environments and to nurture healthy social connection, social and emotional connections among young people. Projects that meaningfully engage and center the person and voices, the perspectives and voices of people who are impacted directly by gun violence. So this could either be, people who are directly impacted or co-survivors, which are people who maybe didn't directly experience a gun violence, but are the loved one or support system of someone who did. Projects that identify and address the primary drivers of gun violence, and projects that address the motivations and barriers to gun ownership and possession among youth. So that's something that were of interest as well. And projects that incorporate the perspectives across disciplines. So interdisciplinary projects, that's something that we're also looking at as well that we have an interest in. So if you could keep those things in mind as you're thinking about your projects, we'd encourage that. So type of project examples, and so you all will see this on the website as well if you go to Stoneleigh Foundation. But so we provide, and so these are, of course, these are topics or areas, focus areas that are of interest to us, but we really want you to really come up with your own ideas if there's a project that you have. So in the area of youth justice, an initiative for legal system involved young people, that provides emotional, social, and other supports that helps them graduate out of legal supervision and minimizes recidivism. Related to health, behavioral health, an initiative that improves uh, how a school system identifies and responds to the behavioral health needs of young people and to help prevent gun carrying or usage. Education, an initiative that addresses the built environment for young people and or contributes to a safe environment in school settings. And this includes after school, weekends, and or summer, which is essentially out of school time, non-traditional school hours. And child welfare, an initiative that increases child welfare organizations' ability to identify protective factors that mitigate the impact of gun violence and exposure and to help with a healthy transition into adulthood. And finally, from a social ecological lens, an initiative that an initiative that examines the impact of trauma-informed green spaces on the ability of young people to play and socialize safely. So again, these are not things that we're expecting applications to address those specific things. However, if that's your organization's interest in one of those areas, then certainly we look forward to those kinds of applications. But we also look forward to your own ideas and creative ways to address gun violence in the city through those lenses. So we're just gonna let this slide sit here for a few seconds in case you have not been to our website yet to see our application. You can scan this QR code with your camera phone.
We'll give folks probably about another 15 to 20 seconds here. I got one question in the chat that we can address while we're waiting. So one person asked if this is being recorded. It is. And for anybody who's attended today or has registered, we'll share a copy of this recording with you via email just a few days after the fact. A couple of other questions in Q&A. I know we'll get to the rest of those at the end of the session.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to note also that the webinar that we did on September 9th is already up on Stoneleigh's YouTube page. So, and it's really the exact same thing. We're just going through the same slides. We just had 2 different live sessions. All right, so when it comes to the letter of interest, so there are 4 or 5 areas that you'll need to cover. And the letter of interest is 2 pages, single spaced. So you have limited space, obviously. And so when it comes to about your organization, you don't need to tell us a ton here, maybe a few sentences we do ask for a link to your website as part of the application. So we can go on your organization's website, look at your about section. So here you want to highlight sort of overarchingly what is the scope and work of your organization. But you also, if there's any gun violence prevention work that you've already been doing, then you would ideally want to include that here as part of the description of about your organization, sort of what you've been doing in that area. Problem statement. So this is about a paragraph or so where you're going to talk about which aspect of gun violence that your project will address. Project description. So here you want to explain the project and how it addresses the problem and whether, and also to discuss your strategy. And so this is key, obviously, because this is what is going to help us understand what is your project and what is it about? How is it going to address gun violence prevention in Philadelphia? And so, so just make sure that you're pretty descriptive here and help us understand pretty clearly what that is. Here we also would like for you to include some goals and any key stakeholders and project partners that you plan to work with to implement this project and some of the major activities. Again, this would be high level activities. We have limited space. We also realize that you're probably still in the stage of conceptualizing the project. And if you're asked to submit a full application, at that time, you'll have time to think through in a lot more detail, and we'll have to explain in more detail. But at this point, we're just looking for high level, and to also include approaches and outcomes that you plan to achieve within that 2-year period. So again, we encourage you to realize it is a 2-year period, to not overpromise or to try to pack too many things in. So really think about what is that high level sort of key impact, a couple of like pretty significant activities that the fellow might work on over the 2-year period and try to focus on that. So we don't expect people to solve the gun violence epidemic in 2 years. We know that that's not realistic. We also want you to talk about the emerging leader fellow. So in this section, you want to identify who will supervise the fellow and what experience they have related to the area of focus of the project. And again, we really are looking for host site supervisors to have the time to meet with fellows and to dedicate supervision to help them grow, because that is a big part of what your responsibility will be, is to help the fellow grow over that 2-year period and hone their expertise. And here you also want to describe the role that the fellow will play in the development and execution of the project and what support the fellow will be provided in order to do that. So the fellow is the person who's leading the project. So fellows really should be the 100% of their time should be dedicated to the project. That's why we pay their salary. And they will be leading the project, but we want to make sure that that you have a good plan for implementing them in the decision making. So once the fellow comes on board, how are they helping to shape the project that they're going to be leading? And we know that, I think all of us know that when we have input into the beginning of a project, that we have a greater level of investment. So we just want to make sure that you all are thinking about that, how you'll socialize the fellow into that. And then to share any of the primary qualities that you'll be looking for. So if, for example, it's a research related project, then you want to say, well, you would want to be looking for a fellow who has expertise in research practices. If it's someone, and so I just want to note that for emerging leader fellows, there is no educational requirement. So we really are looking that the person has the skill set that is required to implement the project. So it may be a person of lived experience who has no degree, but whatever it is that your project is planning, what that person needs to do on that project, if they have the skill set to do that, then that's really what we're looking for versus educational requirements, depending. And phase 2 will be the full proposal. So applicants who are asked to submit a full proposal, who successfully submit their letter of interest and get asked for a full proposal, that will happen. You'll be notified by December 6th of that. So the applications are due November 8th. We'll have like, a month or so to review them, and then you'll know by December 6th if you'll be asked for a full proposal. This will include a cover letter, a detailed proposal, a timeline, a budget, and financial statements, the board list, support letters, etc. The main thing that I'll say here is that if you're asked to submit a full proposal, and when it comes to the area of partnerships, what's I think key here is that if you are particularly looking to partner with a large system, then we really want you to have, it probably would be ideal to have a letter of support from someone within that system. So, for example, you may want to partner with the DA's office or with the Office of Safe Neighborhoods. Those are pretty large institutions that may not move as quickly as you might want them to over that 2-year period. So we just want you to think through, okay, if we're partnering with the DA's office, who are we going to work with inside that system, and what are they agreeing to? And what are we agreeing to, which is essentially what a letter of support might outline, right? So we just want to make sure that, because we've had the experience quite a few times in the past where some organization has said, okay, we're going to work with this large system, with the school district, for example. And then when it comes time to implementation of the project, there are all kinds of barriers that come into place. And so we're trying to prevent that, because that becomes very frustrating for the organization. It's very frustrating for the fellow to not be able to implement their project in the way it was outlined. So I just want to really sort of highlight how important that is, the letter of support there. But we will go into more detail if you'll be provided more detail on each of these areas if you're asked to come back for a full proposal. And those will be due by the 10th of January. So phase 3, it would be candidate recruitment. So if your application is successful, your full application is successful, and we will be looking to fund 4 or 5 of those applications. Then you'll be asked to search for a fellow. So you'll be notified of that, of your application being preliminarily selected, and I'll discuss why that's preliminary momentarily, by the 7th of February. And so at that point, you can then begin looking for a fellow. So it really is the organization's responsibility to find the fellow, to find the person that they think is ideal for this project. And so that will require, and you may already have someone in mind for that, but some organizations may actually need to go out and find someone. So you would need to put together your job description, and you'll have like 5 weeks or so to do this. So you'll have a bit of time to to help recruit the person that you would like to hire as the fellow. I can go to the next. Oh wait, hold on, Mark. I'm sorry. Wait, maybe go back. So project proposals and fellows are presented to the Stoneleigh board, and so that's why I say that it's preliminary, because the board of directors of Stoneleigh are the ones who have to approve the fellowships and the fellows, and so we will be presenting those to the board on the 5th of June. And then fellowships will start by the 9th on the 9th of September. So you'll have plenty of time, because we do realize, and the reason why there's that big gap in between when you will be notified about, that the board has approved your proposal and when the project start, is that we realize that people like a fellow really needs to come from outside the organization. We don't, we actually have a policy, or really don't want people who work inside of the organization already for you to apply for them to be a fellow, because we want this person to really have a discrete position within inside the organization, and existing staff, it's sometimes hard to disentangle them from all the other activities and things that they've been working on. So we realize that it may take some time for that person to have to give notice to their job and all of those things, for the organization to get prepared for the fellow. The summertime is notoriously good for vacations and people being away. So that 3-month period gives plenty of time for organizations and the fellows to really get themselves situated, and hopefully being able to hit the ground running come September 9th. And so how do we evaluate the proposals? And so this you can also find on our website to see the actual rubric. We're not going to pull that up now, but you can see the rubric on the website. but we're for the evaluation, and this is for the full proposal. Okay, so full proposals, this is how we evaluate them. The problem statement and urgency, the project design, organizational capacity, the mission alignments, and so mission alignment means um, the work that the organization has been doing and how does that align with what they're proposing for the project. So, we are looking for organizations who ideally have been doing some work in the gun violence prevention space already. And so you should be able to talk about that and demonstrate how what you're proposing now it's as aligns with that mission. And then learning potential for the fellow. Again, it's really important that the fellow is grows during the course of the fellowship, that they learn quite a bit, that they hone their expertise. We want them to be leaders on the other side of this fellowship. And just a quick note on how like my role as a program officer fits with the host site organization is that I see my role as a program officer really providing the higher level skills that they may need. So as you can see, earlier in the earlier slide, about the program, the professional development activities that I've done with the fellows is focused on people coming in from these larger systems talking about how they've been addressing gun violence prevention. So my role is really helping them to hone their skills on gun violence prevention, leadership more broadly. So we have had leadership development workshops as well. But your role as host site supervisor is to give them all of the more direct skills related to the project. So more of the technical skills. So that may be report writing. It may be related to really understanding the scope and work of the project or the extension of the work that you've been doing that this project is going to address, right? So it's all the kind of day-to-day things that help a person grow and answering their questions and supporting them through challenges. Uh, all right, and so next steps really are really well. I don't know, Mark, if you were going to take this or I can.
You're absolutely right. No, I just realized I saw the name by the slide. Thanks for reminding me. So essentially, the big thing to worry about, right, is that the application deadline is November 8th, by the end of November 8th. And so I know you probably are all either, already working on your applications, or you're thinking of putting an application together, but it's really critical to get it in by that date. But if you have any questions or concerns, obviously we'll answer them here during Q&A, but please also feel free to reach out to us directly. We're always happy to have a conversation about something you're thinking about or a question you might have to try to be as clear as possible about everything. This is our second and final information session, right? So you'll get a recording for this after the fact, and we'll put it up on the Stoneleigh Foundation's YouTube page, up on our website there as well. And so anything you might have heard today that you missed or didn't have a chance to write down, you can view it there. Or again, just feel free to reach out to us. And as part of sharing that recording, we'll send a follow-up email after this session, on which any more useful information that we can think of to share with you all after today. That's the Emerging Leader Fellowship Program. Right before we get to Q&A, I'll just put in a plug for our couple of other programs. So for the Stoneleigh Fellowships, we talked about a little bit at the beginning. We have an open door policy for applying to that. So you can apply at any time, although usually pretty helpful to call beforehand or to email beforehand with the idea. We can talk about it a little bit before you submit it. But that is also, so the primary program officer for that position, that program is our Deputy Director, Marie Williams. And so if you're curious about learning more about that program, you can also reach out to her as well. Let's see, I think that is all for keeping house. But again, just really excited that we're able to do this with the Emerging Leader Program. It's something we get to do once every 2 years. And so just honored to have you all in attendance. We can tell you more about it. So moving on to Q&A. Lee, we have a bunch of really interesting and helpful questions here. I'm going to toss them all over to you, but if there's one you'd like me to answer, just toss it back. So
All right,
first,
yeah, because I don't see any of them really, so I didn't think that we had many. Okay, so go ahead, because I'm not
yeah, I've
seeing
been
them.
telling folks, if we can't answer it right away, they'll get to it in Q&A. So first one here comes from Joyce McMillan in New York City. Very basic question. Does Stoneleigh fund outside of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, unfortunately not. So all projects do have the organization may not be like headquartered on it so it's possible that an organization is not headquartered in Philadelphia, but if they're doing work, having some work that has impact inside of Philadelphia, then that's really what is key. But yeah, so we only fund organizations that are doing work inside of Philadelphia County.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the only thing I would add to that is if you'll check on our website, we do have one or two Stoneleigh Fellows that are outside of PA, but they're more the exception to the rule. Primarily,
Hmm.
folks are in Pennsylvania or around the Philadelphia area.
Hmm.
Okay, let's see here. So, similar question. So much of the policy governing the youth legal system is state statute, right, part of the state law. Is there a limit to engagement within the city of Philadelphia, or can projects be focused on or engage state actors such as PCCD or the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, the State Department?
Hmm. Yeah, so I guess further clarification, as Mark just mentioned, that we do have some fellows who are doing work statewide or in other parts of the state that will have the potential to have impact in Philadelphia County. So essentially an organization could pitch a project that is not directly only focused on Philadelphia, but the main thing that you need to think about is how will it have some impact in Philadelphia County, if that makes sense. So it could be a statewide project, but in which Philadelphia is also included in and it will impact there in some way. So if you would like, you can reach out with a more specific question, like if there's an idea that you have, my email address is just lcarson@stoneleigh-foundation.org. But you can reach out to me and with email with a very specific ask so that I can answer that like in a more detailed way.
Perfect. Thanks, Lee. So next question comes from Shante Brabham. Shante, I think you might have asked this question before Lee answered it, and then he answered it during the presentation, but I think helpful to clarify it again in case folks missed it or folks had a similar question. So it's primarily about who can be the emerging leader, right? So Shante writes, can the emerging leader be the executive director of the organization or another employee or a new hire? What are the limitations of who this emerging leader fellow can be? Thank
Mhm.
you.
So the main limit, so ideally it is a person who is from outside the organ, so it would be a new hire essentially. So that's really Um, if you make a very strong case, it's possible that an existing employee. So, for example, I think in the last info session, someone said that there's an employee who might be leaving the organization because maybe funding was an issue or something, and so they're wondering could that person who previously worked for the organization be an emerging leader fellow? And the answer to that is yes. Like that is an example of someone that even though they've worked at the organization and they um, have experience at the organization, as long if they've left and are going to be coming back if the fellowship is awarded, then that person would be eligible. I would say an executive director, that would be a harder pitch. One, because executive directors, again, emerging leader fellows have to be 100% dedicated to the project. So there's no way that an executive director would be able to dedicate 100% to their fellowship because they have so many other responsibilities to take care of. Education wise, as discussed earlier, there are no educational requirements for Stoneleigh Fellows. So I think really the main thing there is that the person isn't currently employed by the organization and has some skill set related to the project activities, the project that you're pitching. That's really the main qualifications.
Perfect. Thanks, Lee. So next question, I think is similar, but a little different. This is from Ivian at the Nonprofit Center at LaSalle University. Could the fellow be a student at the university? And Ivian, I think we might benefit from some clarification on this one. It sounds like maybe that the person would be the student at the university, but then taking on a job right at a department within the university if they were to be the host organization for the Emerging Leader Fellows. So I guess
Mhm.
I think that might be the question, Lee, but Iviana, if that's not the case, please let us know in an additional Q&A submission.
So these are full-time positions. So if a person is a student, maybe they're a part-time student. I don't know if they'd be able to be a full-time student and full-time employed. That seems like a lot for a person to handle, but if the case is made, if that's the case, but a person can be a student for sure. That's not a problem as long as they have the qualifications, um, for the project. It's just that it is a full-time position. So.
Yeah. Great. Next question comes from Danielle or Daniel, depending. School District Office of Climate and Culture. Is there an opportunity to do an elevator pitch on Zoom or via phone, or to have a conversation with Stoneleigh before embarking on the application?
Daniel, good to see you here.
Oh, perfect. Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
I know who Daniel is. Yeah, it is Daniel. Um, yeah, so you can reach out to me. Like if there is a specific, if you're sort of thinking about something, then you can reach out to me by email. Again, lcarson@stoneleigh and share what you're thinking about. We've had people do that. And so we'll give you feedback. I'll give you feedback on that. So certainly that is an option. Yeah. So more so, I think it would be helpful just to email me. And then if I need clarification more or something like that, then maybe we could talk on the phone or by Zoom. But yeah, that is a possibility.
Perfect. All right, next question comes from Stephanie from Children's First. Can fellows, emerging leader fellows, engage in direct advocacy, or is the policy work limited to, for example, policy research or
Mhm.
dissemination of best practices?
hmm Yeah, we get this question. We probably should include it in because this came up the last time too. So maybe we should just include it in the presentation. So, related to advocacy, Stoneleigh is a nonprofit organization, as well as most of your organizations are. But either way, the funds are coming from Stoneleigh, even if your organization is not a nonprofit organization. So, fellows are not able to advocate, are not able to lobby or to promote specific legislation. What they can do is education, and there's no limit to that. So it may be that through the fellowship that you collected lots of information about the impact or how well a certain kind of um, approach is working, and you educate elected officials about that. Not that you're saying we really want you to vote for this, but we just want to educate you on XYZ things. So advocacy is prohibited or any kind of lobbying, but education is allowed.
Perfect. Thank you. For this next question, so we have two questions here from Belinda Nelson. For the first one, I'm going to pop up our rubric on a screen share. Just give me 1 second here. So the question from Belinda is, are the listed criteria weighted evenly? And so Lee and everyone else, can you see the summary review form here? Is that right?
I can, yeah, it's a little
Perfect. Okay.
small, but yeah.
Let me make it a little bigger here. So we will share a link again to this rubric in our post-event email, but this is exactly what the Stoneleigh staff and others will be using when we're going through the applications, right? So you can even see the breakdown in sub dots here, talking about what do we mean when we say problem statement and urgency. So Belinda, for project design and organizational capacity, those are particularly critical for us. So we do the scoring for that is weighted twice as heavily to answer your question. But take a closer look at this rubric when you have a chance, and hopefully it should give you some more detail on that. And again, we'll share a link to that in our post-event email. You can also find it if you go to the application form at the very top there. It'll say, check out the rubric for
hmm
our form here. Belinda, your second
hmm
question, and this one's for you, Lee. Are former fellows of the program able to reapply?
That's a good question, actually. I don't, I'm not, Mark has been here longer than I have, but um, I think that we are looking, I think that we probably would be less inclined to want because we're hoping, for example, that after one goes through the Emerging Leader Fellowship, that they're gonna elevate their leadership potential and maybe at some point be able to be a Stoneleigh Fellow, potentially be eligible for that type of a fellowship. So certainly with our Stoneleigh Fellowship, there are examples of people who were Emerging Leader Fellows and did end up getting a Stoneleigh Fellowship later as they've like kind of further developed their skills and advanced in their leadership within a certain area. So I would say that we'd probably be less inclined because it's just a limited opportunity. We only fund 4 to 5 fellows every 2 year period. So to fund a previous fellow, I think we'd be less inclined to do that.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly right, Lee. I'll try to. And again, we can only really speak for ourselves. Stoneleigh takes a committee approach to looking at these projects and applications, and so depending on the specifics, we could have a greater conversation. But Belinda, reach out to us if you have kind of a different question than what I'm going to try to answer here, because I think there's a couple of ways to interpret this. One is that I think for the Emerging Leader Fellowship program, it's a very straightforward answer, which is that once an Emerging Leader Fellow goes through the program, we would no longer consider them an emerging leader, right? So they could not then go through the program a second time. However, to Lee's point, we have had emerging leaders who have then applied at a future date to become Stoneleigh Fellows, right? And that's sort of if you think of the spectrum of leadership, they're sort of taking the next step in their leadership journey. Likewise, we have certainly had emerging leader host organizations, former host organizations, apply for new emerging leader fellows in the future, right? So I believe, I'll give you an example. I believe Education Law Center might be one of our host organizations that's had more than one, right? An emerging leader fellow, a few years past, they get another one. So certainly former host organizations are eligible to apply if they're not currently host organizations, or current host organizations that are hosting emerging leaders are eligible to apply for a new emerging leader. I feel like there was something else. Oh, and then also you might have somebody who's a former emerging leader who is running a host organization that wants to apply to host an emerging leader of their own. But I think the key question here is that somebody who's already been an emerging leader cannot then reapply to become an emerging leader again. Lee, feel free to elaborate on any of that. I'll take a look at our next question, but let us know, Belinda, either in the Q&A or through an email if that answered your question.
Yeah, the next question, I'm not sure if I fully understand. I don't know if you do, Mark.
So Avian,
After,
I think what you're referring to Avian's question. After 2 years, could an emerging leader fellow be brought on as an employee? Here is my understanding of that question. And again, Avian, let us know if we're
okay,
getting it wrong, which is that yes, we do have often several emerging leader fellows who go through the program, and then as they're ending their fellowship, they make their transition to becoming a full-time
okay.
staff member otherwise at that host
Hmm.
organization. The key difference here for the host organization is that Stoneleigh is funding that 2 year fellowship, right? So we're covering the salary and benefits during that 2 year time period. In order to make the transition to a full time staff person, the host organization would need to obtain funding from somewhere else, right? In order to cover that person's salary and
Hmm.
benefits. Stoneleigh does not do an extension or provide funding for a person once they've concluded their fellowship.
Hmm.
So, oh, good. Belinda, I'm glad to hear that we answered your
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah. So thank you, Mark. Yeah, after you started, I was like, oh, that question makes total sense. So yeah, and what Mark said, and so that's why, as I mentioned earlier, like at the 1 year mark, I'll begin having conversations with the host site organizations and the fellows to be thinking about sustainability, because if the fellow, for example, if the fellow wants to stay on at the organization working on this project after that 2 year period, it's going to require time and identifying of resources of how the organization will fund that position. It also may require thinking, like, does the person need to work on this 100%? Maybe there are other grants or other projects inside the organization, because there's no longer, once they're a full-time employee, they're no longer at Stoneleigh, so there's no requirement that they're still 100% dedicated to that project. So it may be that you only need to find 30% of additional funding to continue this kind of work versus the other 70% that might come from other funding within the organization that that person can split their time. It's only during the fellowship that we really require the fellow to be 100% focused on the project.
All right. Well, I think unless there are any other questions that I don't see any others here that we haven't already answered, I think we are all
Mm-mm.
set. So, Lee, is there any other final points or things you want folks to know before we hop off here?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we're looking forward to really awesome applications. We are looking forward to, again, being able to address for another couple of years the gun violence epidemic in Philadelphia, which we know continues to be a challenge, even though all the data is telling us that that there's a positive trend in the reduction of gun violence related homicides and shootings generally, but it still continues to be a problem. So we look forward to your projects and your creative thought on what projects you're pitching to us that you think will help to continue to help us move in a downward trend towards towards additional gun violence in Philadelphia. And so please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions beyond this. Again, as Mark mentioned, that this will be posted on our, you'll get a link to this. It should be on our YouTube page as well. But again, we already have a video from our first info session on the YouTube page. So if you can't wait until you get the link, then you can always go there. But otherwise, I look forward to any questions that you might have via email as well.
Thanks, Lee. We have one more question since we have one more minute left. I'm going to try to get it in here under the deadline since there are folks still on the call. And again, it's from Ivian. After 2 years, could another emerging leader fellow be brought on to continue the project? And the answer to that is no. We do require a gap between, right? So let's say if you were to apply and get an emerging leader fellow, at the end of that fellowship, you would have to take a cycle off, and then you could then apply for another emerging leader fellow. And I think we would even go so far as to say that we would want the next emerging leader fellow to focus on something different, right? That it isn't just a continuation of the work that's already been happening, because we want this to kind of be something different from the organization. Does that sound about right, Lee?
Yep, that's exactly right. Yep.
All right, with that, well, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it again. Any additional questions or concerns, please reach out to us, but we'll follow up with you all in the next several days with a copy of this recording, copy of the rubric, and any other helpful information that we can think of. Till then, take care and have a wonderful rest of the week.